Hey, today I'm going to talk about interpersonal principles of psychotherapy. The first point I really want to make is that contemporary integrative interpersonal theory is not a brand of psychotherapy. There is a thing called interpersonal therapy. There's lots of different kinds of therapies, often with acronyms. From a contemporary integrative interpersonal theory perspective, there isn't a single kind of therapy that tends to work best. People have different preferences for different formulations, for different orientations, for different ways of working with people. It's often helpful to have a heuristic model rooted in a specific orientation to help organize thinking and to generate hypotheses, etc. But interpersonal theory operates at a level one step removed from those specific kinds of therapy brands. It's not a kind of therapy, it's a way of thinking about psychotherapy, regardless of what kind of orientation is being used. So you can use the interpersonal approach to think about interpersonal processes in cognitive behavioral therapy or psychodynamic psychotherapy or any other kind of approach that you might prefer. There's three principles that I'm going to talk about today. The first is complementarity. Complementarity was discussed in another video that I've posted on my page. You can check that out. Um, and to review, complementarity simply means the way that people tend to interact with each other. And there's two rules. One is if I'm dominant, you'll tend to be submissive, and if you're dominant, I'll tend to be submissive. So there's a kind of opposite pattern on the vertical axis of the interpersonal circle. And if you're warm and friendly, I'll tend to be warm and friendly, whereas if you're cold, I'll tend to be cold. So there's similarity on the horizontal affiliative axis of the interpersonal circle. Complementarity is the most common way people interact with each other. It feels normal. It feels smooth. When interactions are complementary, they tend to be more stable. And when both people are getting out of that interaction what they want to be getting out of it, it's a good sign, right? So for example, if two people are relative equals, maybe they're warm and friendly to each other and they take turns being kind of in charge. If two people are in a sort of power hierarchy, maybe one person tends to be more dominant than the other, for example, a parent with their child. Um, if two people have to work together but don't really want to have a close relationship, maybe they'll be cold towards one another. They won't be interested in each other's personal lives, etc., but they can still work comfortably together and manage that, although it tends to be more complicated on the cold side than the warm side. Oftentimes, coldness is a sign that things are not going well, in addition to non-complementarity. Complementarity in psychotherapy can use productively to build a therapeutic alliance, to maintain smoothness, to repair rupture. And generally speaking, we find in research that most therapy interactions are complementary most of the time, right? So, for example, if you have a psychotherapy patient who in the first session arrives and says, "Look, I've been thinking about this. I'm out of ideas. I don't know what to do. I feel like I just want to put my fate in your hands and I need you to help me figure out my life." They're coming in with a very submissive kind of point of view. And a complementary response might be to say, I have expertise. Maybe some of the things that I've tried in the past could be helpful to you. Maybe I have some ideas that can be productive and give you some new ideas, right? And so this will tend to be reassuring for a person to say, okay, I think this person gets what I'm looking for, and and the alliance can build from there. If a client comes in very distant, cold, suspicious, hostile, paranoid, um, the appropriate complementary response would be to keep one's distance, maybe be measured in trying to probe personal questions. Don't focus so much on sort of establishing a warm working relationship. Stick to the facts and the protocol and let that perhaps ease over time, right? If a client comes and is very dominant, says, "Look, I understand what I need. I need this kind of therapy. This is my problem. I've thought it all through. I just need someone to kind of guide me along." Then you might say, "Okay, it sounds like you've done a lot of thinking about this, and that's good that you've come in prepared, and I'm happy to help you as you see fit, etc." Right? So the idea is that complementary interactions can help build alliance and sort of maintain trust and uh, and enable the therapeutic relationship to kind of proceed. On the other hand, if you're only complementary, A lot of times, the interpersonal process that brought the person to the psychotherapy in the first place will just be reinforced and sustained through therapeutic behaviors, right? So there are times to introduce strategic non-complementarity. For example, with that first client who was submissive and said, I've given up. I'm trying to figure it out for myself. I just need you to tell me what to do. Ultimately, you're going to want that person to be able to go out and live their own life without being told what to do by an authority figure, a therapist, or whomever. And so once alliance is established and there's trust, it might be time to introduce some submissive non-complementarity yourself. You might say, I also don't know what to do in this situation. Maybe you should come up with some ideas, or I just don't know, right? And this kind of approach will probably increase anxiety in the client, and that's a good thing because anxiety should motivate change. If it can be titrated effectively, you put the patient in the position to have to think of some of their own solutions, and thereby generalize it to their life outside of therapy and learn that they can be responsible for their own behavior. Vice versa, with the dominant client that I gave an example of a moment ago, at some points it might make sense to say, well, like you sort of thought that you knew what to do in that situation, but it didn't work out for you. And I wonder if maybe the part of the trouble was that other people have ideas too, right? So by introducing a kind of challenging, non-complementary dominant behavior, you maybe increase anxiety and provide an opportunity for some reflection and for some changing behavior patterns. In a previous video, I talked about how Terry Tracy introduced a three-stage model of psychotherapy where he suggested that in the beginning of stage of psychotherapy, high complementarity can help establish rapport, but over time, if you don't introduce some non-complementarity, then a person's interpersonal patterns will just kind of sustain and they won't change. And so in the middle stage of therapy, strategic titrated levels of non-complementarity can introduce some conflict between patient and therapist, can introduce some anxiety in the client, but that's the anxiety that will motivate change and lead to new behavioral patterns, which are then resolved in the third stage. Now, Terry focused on complementarity as it plays out from one session to the next. There's other research suggesting that within session processes work a similar way, that the beginning and the end of therapy tends to be a therapy session tends to be kind of smooth, maybe warm, maybe more complementary. In the middle, you kind of have to get into it. And from a rupture repair sort of perspective, these dynamics can happen at different sorts of time scales, right? And so complementarity is a good way to avoid rupture. It's a good way to resolve rupture, but oftentimes ruptures reflect non-complementary patterns, and those patterns can in fact be productive. There's evidence suggesting that it's not so much whether you have ruptures in therapy sessions that predicts good versus bad outcomes, but rather whether those ruptures can be resolved. That brings us to the third principle, metacommunication. Metacommunication is a common concept in many kinds of psychotherapies. There's different words for this, mentalization or interpretation. Metacommunication basically means talking about the relationship. One metaphor that I like is the observation deck. So you and the therapist and the client kind of has an interaction with each other and sort of gets into it and has ruptures, has repairs, has a relationship, a real relationship. And then sometimes you sort of step away from that interaction, go up onto an observation deck where you can both look down together at that interaction and talk about it with one another. Say, well, you said this and I said this, and that made me feel that way, and I think maybe you wanted this. And that can help both clear up any potential ruptures, but it can also help the client learn something about their interpersonal patterns that probably generalizes to relationships outside the therapy session. So we use the interpersonal situation model for this. There's another video about the interpersonal situation model. The reason that we find it helpful is because it covers most of the material that would be discussed in a metacommunicative moment. So what did you do? What did I do? How did you feel? How did I feel? What did you want? What did I want? How are you seeing things? How was I seeing things? And what blind spots might you and I have had during that interaction? So those are the three psychotherapy principles that you can bring to any kind of psychotherapy orientation. to both use and understand interpersonal processes in psychotherapy. See ya.